The Jomon period, a study of the first people in Japan. Japan's storied history stretches back far before recorded history. The islands were a prime spot for early humans to find all manner of food and resources. There are some unique features that made this location ideal for early settlers. First, there are over 100 active volcanoes across Japan. This is about 10% of all the active volcanoes on the planet. This is due to the fact that Japan is situated upon the meeting point of two massive tectonic plates that form a horseshoe shape. This area is referred to as the Pacific Ring of Fire. It is known for earthquakes and volcanic activity, which may sound like it would dissuade humans from visiting, much less settling there. However, there is a major benefit to living in a location like this. As we see in other volcanically formed archipelagos like Hawaii, the ash distributed by eruptions improved the fertility of the soil. Ash contains minerals that weather into the soil and nourish plants. Subsequently, a variety of edible plants for humans and animals alike flourished. The forests that grew here also provided a habitat for a variety of wild game, which humans could hunt for food, hides, and other useful resources. Secondly, Japan is an island chain. This provided natural protection from invasion, as well as access to fishing in the bountiful seas surrounding the islands. Fish would become an important staple for Japan's earliest humans. Some archaeologists believe the history of human habitation of the Japanese archipelago could date back as far as 100,000 years. However, as with most of human history from long ago, there's not much in the way of tangible evidence. As we mentioned above, the Japanese archipelago would have made an attractive spot to early humans living on nearby islands or the mainland of Southeast Asia. So it makes sense to assume human habitation of Japan goes back a long time. The study of Paleolithic Japan relies heavily on stratigraphy, or the study of soil layers. The volcanoes of Japan are quite helpful to archaeologists, since eruptions would cover the soil of the island with levels of volcanic ash, which are easy to detect and useful as a reference for establishing dates. The earliest human remains discovered in Japan were found in the Yamashita caves in modern-day Okinawa. Archaeologists found tools made of deer horns and bones along with the remains of a 7-year-old girl. Carbon dating revealed these to be around 32,000 years old, making them the first physical evidence we have of human habitation in the archipelago. Around that time, there was an ice age which created lower sea levels. This in turn created land bridges that early settlers were able to walk across. One land bridge to the north connected the island of Sakhalin to Hokkaido. Another connected the Ryukyu Islands with Taiwan to the south. The lower sea levels also mean the Korea Strait was significantly more narrow than it is today, making it another route ancient peoples may have used to reach Japan. It is unclear whether or not the peoples who settled in Japan at this time are the ancestors of modern Japanese people. It is possible that they are, having assimilated with later groups that migrated here. It is equally likely that they died off and are not the ancestors of the modern Japanese. Whether they are a part of the lineage of the modern-day Japanese or not, it is worth noting they were responsible for the creation of some of the first ground and polished stone tools in the world, dating back to around 30,000 BCE. In most of the rest of the world, comparable tools would not be seen until around 10,000 BCE. The most prevalent theory is that the earliest ancestors of modern Japanese people arrived in two waves of migration. The first migration is a group of people called the Jomon. The second group of people are known as the Yayoi. The Jomon period spans from around 14,500 BCE to around 300 BCE. In the early Jomon period, there are estimated to have been roughly 20,000 people living in the Japanese archipelago. They subsisted largely through hunting and gathering. By the Middle Jomon periods, the population exploded to around 260,000 people. At this point, they had reached a high level of cultural complexity, as evidenced by their elaborate tool making and jewelry made of stone, bone, and shells. They carved boats from tree trunks and used them for fishing and traveling, though it is unclear if they used sails or paddles. Two of the biggest technological advances created by the Jomon people were the bow and arrow and pottery. These appear to have been invented independently by the Jomon people, rather than being introduced from the outside. The Jomon people lived in round or rectangular houses with thatched roofs that were partially buried in the earth. These were known as pit dwellings. They made use of indoor fireplaces for cooking and warmth. As the population grew, larger and larger settlements formed. This gave birth to a network of trade between these different settlements. They were able to trade resources such as fish, meat, or certain varieties of edible plants. There was even a large village with over 700 buildings that appears to have been a central trade hub for the different villages. The Jomon period appears to have been a time of relative peace. The skeletal remains found do not indicate a high incidence of death at the hands of other humans. By the end of the Jomon period, the population decreased sharply to only about 76,000. This massive depopulation was likely caused by food shortages. Since Jomon society relied heavily on Japan's abundant natural resources, this also made them susceptible to an adverse change in climate. It is also likely that the increased population used their resources faster than nature could replenish them. Remember, they weren't farming on any appreciable scale, just taking the bounty of the earth and waiting for nature to give them more. This reduced population set the stage for the next wave of immigrants, the Yayoi. The Yayoi. The period from 300 BCE and 250 CE is known as the Yayoi period. Between 1000 and 800 BCE, an ethnically distinct group of people known as the Yayoi migrated from the mainland to the Japanese archipelago. They mixed with the Jomon people to form the ancestors of the modern Japanese people. One of the hallmarks of the Yayoi period is the shift from hunting and gathering towards agriculture. Compared to China and Europe, Japan was very late to adopt farming. For context, here are a few things that were happening in the rest of the world at this time. Han Dynasty China was inventing paper, water clocks, and sundials, and the adjustable wrench. During this time, the Greek classical period was just ending. Greece had already advanced in philosophical thought, the art of theatre, and a political system known as democracy. By the end of the Yayoi period, the mighty Roman Empire was in decline. The origins of the Yayoi people is a matter of scholarly debate. Many historians suspect they came to Japan either via the Korean peninsula, crossing the Tsushima Strait, or from the north of China via the Yellow Sea. When the Yayoi arrived, they encountered the Jomon people who had already been living on the Japanese archipelago for thousands of years. The Yayoi introduced them to techniques such as wet rice farming and metalworking. Regardless of their origins, the Yayoi encountered a Jomon people that were in decline. They were hungry and had stripped the land of its resources. The Yayoi brought the technology of wet rice farming and changed everything. They set up rice paddies, which provided a steady and reliable source of food to permanent settlements. This allowed for a massive population boom. Armed with their superior technology, the Yayoi population quickly outpaced the Jomon. They produced more simple, functional pottery than the Jomon. They created and popularized bronze bells and mirrors. They also developed spiritual practices that evolved over time into what would be known as the Shinto religion. The Yayoi did not have a writing system, so much of the information we have today about them comes from archaeological evidence and the writings of the Chinese. Prehistory of Japan, Paleolithic, Jomon, and Yayoi periods, ND. The Chinese record that during the time of the Yayoi, Japan was broken into 100 kingdoms. There were roughly 30 kingdoms that traded directly with Japan. With the growing inequality of social classes, those at the top amassed greater and greater wealth. This led to war and intense rivalries between the different kingdoms, powered by the newly introduced bronze weapons. The Yayoi people lived in clans called uji. The leader of each clan was not only a political leader, but also a religious leader of said clan. Each clan had its own spirit, or god, called a kami. When one clan conquered another, they also conquered its kami. This meant they grew in spiritual power. Eventually, one state emerged as the dominant force in Japan. This was known as the Kingdom of Yamatai. Their ruler was a shaman queen called Himiko. She partly achieved her power through trade as a tributary kingdom with China. The influence of China on Japan in this period cannot be overstated. China was well aware of its political dominance throughout Asia. It asserted this power by forcing all kingdoms that traded with China to do so as a subservient tributary state. These kingdoms would give gifts to China as a tribute to China's greatness. In return, China would give gifts, titles, and honors to these kingdoms. Japanese kingdoms that received this kind of recognition from mighty China gained a certain legitimacy in the region.